We may be making some forward-looking statements today, so please base your purchasing decisions on current features and functionality and not on any forward-looking statements we make. Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Lee, Admin Evangelist at Salesforce. Thank you for joining me for my first Automate This of 2023. Super excited for the content we will have in store for you this year. We're live each month, so come back to the same page to watch this again on video on demand. The best way to be notified when we live stream is to set a reminder on the live stream episode page, and you'll get an email reminder on the day of the event. And to interact with the audience, post your comments in the chat window, and to interact with me and my guest presenters, start your question with a Q:, so I can quickly scan through and identify your questions for the Q&A section. So here's what you're going to learn in today's episode. The order of execution plays a bigger role in flows because of the before save and after save in the order of execution. And know that your flow doesn't have to be perfect the first time you build it. Do the best that you can and then go back and make incremental tweaks to it as you learn more about flow. And lastly, you got this, awesome admins. So today I'm joined by Rebecca Glasser, a solution architect, and Diana Jaffe, Senior Director of Product Management at Salesforce. Diana is the PM for Record Triggered Flows, and Rebecca will share her insights about migrating workflow roles to Flow for not one, but two orgs. So we'll hear what she's learned, the gotchas, and things to consider as you make your own journey to Flow. And Diana will join us back a little later to share with us the migration roadmap, and she'll be on hand to answer all those product questions that you have. So hello, Rebecca and Diana. Happy New Year to you both.
Hello.
Happy New Year.
All right, so Rebecca, I know that there are many awesome admins tuned in today who have yet to start their flow journey. Can you share with us what resources you use to start yours and how is it going?
So I started my flow journey about a year and a half ago before Trailhead had some of the content it has now. So the biggest help to me was Salesforce Break. There's a Udemy course which really started turning the light bulbs on. It let me know that I could learn this because, we all know flow is a complicated tool. And then there's an advanced flow course, which is where it really connected the dots. And by the end of the course, I was able to go in and create a quick flow in 5 minutes. And I actually started looking at things I had built before the course and thought, why did I build it that way? And there's also a Slack channel where you can ask questions and share your accomplishments. So as far as how is it going, I'm still learning. I'm learning every day. There's actually a list of changes that I want to go back to make because of things that I've learned, and tweaks, honestly, that I'm still making, even something I learned yesterday.
And I think Salesforce Break is actually on the chat. So, hi. All right.
Thanks
So,
for joining.
what advice or words of wisdom do you have for admins who are starting on this journey?
I feel like a lot of it is a little bit of a mind game in that you look at, how many flows I have to convert over, and that's, it can be intimidating. So one of my orgs has 41 workflows, and to think about, we have to convert all that over is intimidating. So for me, it's about taking the first step, which for us was making a list of all the workflows. And one of them is 8 years old, so it has a bunch of workflows that were daisy chained together because it was before Process Builder came out. So I did an analysis of what workflows went together, what maybe I could group together, what was kind of a one-off, and really what was the simplest that we could start with first. So as part of that, we were still learning flow. So started with the easiest workflows to migrate first, especially as everyone's learning, because not only is that going to help build confidence, but you can also cross something off your list. And then reach out for help. Like
Mhm.
I've said, Salesforce Break has been an incredible resource for me. I think Trailhead has bulked up a lot of their content. And then, people go on Twitter to ask questions. There always seems to be somebody on Twitter who's available to help too.
Yeah, definitely. As part of Project Flowmentum, the internal team has been working on boosting up our flow content. As you mentioned, Trailhead, we're taking a look at all our previous modules that had workflow roles or processes and updating those to flow. There's also recently been several super badges that have been produced around flow. So there's definitely a lot of focus here internally on getting that flow content out.
I saw the super badges. They're on my list. I definitely want, there's a bunch of super badges too.
Mm-hmm. And they're much easier now that they don't take the full width of I think they used to be like 5 to 6 hours, and now they're more like you can do it in less, like each unit in less than an hour or so.
Oh, excellent.
So a few months back, I saw your post on Twitter that you were migrating workflow roles to Flow. So can you share with us how you started this journey, and then how many workflow roles did you convert?
So I have two orgs, and so I had a contractor who was rolling off one project and had some time, and I knew what this was coming, so we started working on it. So in one org, the we actually had 25 workflows. We were able to deactivate 4 and convert the rest into 15 flows. And then in the other org, the older one, we had 41 workflows, and we deactivated 2 and converted the rest into 36 flows.
Great. So how did you determine the overall design of the flow? Like which ones were one-to-one workflow role to flow, and then how many did you take, like many, to consolidate into one workflow? And then like how did you determine which ones you converted to before and after say flow?
So we used the workflow migration tool where we could, partially because in my mind, the thought of, at least at that point, starting a flow from scratch is a little intimidating. So, started out using the workflow migration tool, and I would go in and tweak it. Um, we weren't always able to because there are some conditions where the migration tool can't be used, as you'll see in the demo. I would say the design of the flow, it started out being dictated by the workflow itself. And then our analysis would indicate, if we had multiple workflows doing very similar conditions, then a lot of times those can be combined with a decision element in the flow. And a lot of things were daisy chained. And so, in which case, could we redesign the process to make it simpler in flow? Um, So then regarding before save and after save, we try to make as many flows before save as we could because before save flows are faster and use less resources. And that's because run before the record is saved, and save can actually cause other things to run, like validation rules, duplicate rules, that type of thing. The interesting thing is I found that more of our flows needed to be after save than I thought, because in a couple of scenarios we had a flow that pulls data from one part of a record to another, with information that occurred during the transaction, and that needs to be an after save, which kind of sounds like a duh moment, but it didn't occur to me until after we were testing it. So also, anytime you're doing something with related records, like creating a task, sending an email, something like that, it will need to be an after save flow.
Right. So, having gone through this process twice, what would you say are important things an admin should consider as they plan out their migration?
Get a list of your workflows and do an analysis first. We got the list. We didn't necessarily do the analysis the first time we did it because we're still figuring out the process. Do an analysis first. That will save you time in the long run. Start with converting the easier flows first, especially if you're at the beginning of your flow journey, because again, that's going to help you build confidence. And then as you learn more about flows, you may want to go back and make adjustments. I certainly have a list of things that I want to go back and update, and that's okay. And then the last thing I know that's probably on a lot of people's mind is this is coming. You're going to have to work with your business owners to plan some time to do this. I know that's tough, especially for our solo admins out there. So think about maybe doing this piecemeal. So pull the list first, maybe start doing an analysis, see where you can convert the simple ones first, and maybe you can move those in releases to production where you have other items going as well. The sooner you start, the more time you're going to have.
Mm-hmm. And what are some gotchas or tips that you've learned in this journey that you'd like to share with our audience?
The order of execution got me more than once, which I find kind of funny, honestly. So before save flows can run before validation rules if you're creating multi-line items. So I will say that I feel like I have a better understanding of the order of execution when working with flows. To me, I've got more control over because it's before save and after save. Um, be mindful of looping in flows. There's an executed element limit that you can hit if you've got integrations. Though I think, Safe Harbor, I think that's going to be updated in spring 23.
Yes.
And then workflows do seem to do a few things behind the scenes that you have to kind of plan for in flows. So, for example, we have a workflow that sends an email out to the case owner. If the case owner is inactive, someone emails an old resolved case, the workflow it didn't fail. We didn't get any notifications, anything. But we had an instance where the flow failed because the case owner is inactive. So it's just something I didn't even think about. So I went back and just kind of put something in the flow so that it wouldn't run for an inactive case owner. And then the final thing, use Notepad++ to format your formulas. Your future self will thank you. And to me, it just makes it more readable. So.
Great. Now, can you share with us an example or two of workflow rules that you converted to flow, and then step us through the process?
Yep. So I have two workflows here. They do something very similar. And let me explain. You can see here agent user and field user. So for us, an agent user is someone who is in the system all the time, and they want to receive a task when someone emails into a case so that they know they need to go look at the case. A field user is someone who's in the system sporadically, and they wanted an email sent to them, and they wanted their own email template. So in order to do this, we created two custom fields on case and one custom field on user. So on user, I'll show it here. You can see field user checkbox. If it's checked, it means you're a field user. If it's not checked, it means you're an agent user. We also created 2 custom fields on case. One was last email date, and what that does is it takes the date time the new email is received and puts it on the case. And then email owner address takes the from email address in the email and puts it on the case. And we're using that in multiple scenarios as well. So we're going to look at the field user just to look at the workflow criteria. And you can see here we're using is changed, so where the last email date on the case is changed, where the case owner's email address does not equal the from email address, and then here where field user is equal to true. So let's look at the migration tool. You can get to the migration tool a couple of different ways. One is on the workflow screen, you can see it here. And the other way is if you're in setup, you can just type in migrate and it's right there. So we're going to click migrate to your workflow. So, and here they are. You have to do them one at a time. And one thing to note, so this agent user has a task. You actually get an error. You can't convert task workflow actions to flow, which in our case is okay. It's a simple enough workflow and we're going to merge it together. So the field user one is the one with the email, so we're going to migrate that. Now you have the ability to activate the flow, so it'll actually switch your workflow rule and flow activations. Sometimes I use this, sometimes I don't. In this case, we're going to have to go back and deactivate the workflows. So I probably won't use it this time. So if you click Test in Flow Builder, here's our migrated flow. So we're going to go in and look at the entry criteria. So object is case, it's when it's created or updated. And then here in the formula field, you can see this is exactly what came over from the workflow. Now for me, this isn't the most readable thing in the world. So what I like to do is put it in Notepad++. And you can see here, to me, this is a lot more readable. The other thing with Notepad++ is you can see open parentheses, close parentheses. I don't know about anybody else, but I've had a bunch of times where I've had to sit there counting parentheses because they're off. And so this makes it a lot easier. So I've also done the same thing. This is the criteria for the second workflow. And I did want to point out, you can see in the flow, you see $record, whereas that doesn't exist in the workflow. $record is Flow's way of knowing that we're pulling the value from the current record. So looking at this formula, you can see here the only difference is for the converted workflow, field user is equal to true, field user is equal to false. We don't need to combine that because it's a checkbox. It's always going to be true or false. So this is our new flow formula. Now you can see I did add a condition here, and this is because we don't want this flow to fire when the case is owned by a queue. So we're going to copy this and paste this in here and check syntax, and it's good. So now we're going to look at when to run the flow for updated conditions. And Salesforce has actually made this a lot easier to understand. So you'll see I have the first one checked. That's because I'm using is changed. You want to use the second one as much as possible. So that's because it's only going to run once when the record is actually updated to meet the conditions in the flow. So let's take an example. You have a checkbox on a case. You want the flow to run once, the first and only time that the checkbox is checked. Pick the second one. With the first one, it's going to run the first time the checkbox is checked and every time after because the checkbox is still checked. So optimizing the flow, we have fast field updates, which is before save, and we have actions and related records, which is after save. Like we talked before, use before save as much as possible because it's faster, less resources. But here we have to use an after save because we are going to send an email or we're going to create a task. So that's it for that. Now we want to add a decision. So we're going to click Add Element and then type in decision. I think this is a recent development as well. So here we're going to just type in whatever the label is you want. I would recommend adding as many descriptions as you can because it's going to help your future self. And then here, our first outcome is going to be field user. So the resource we're going to search for, we want the current record, which is a $record. And then here we want owner, user in parentheses. And here we're going to type for field user. So that's how we're getting to the field user checkbox on the user record. And here, because it's a field user, global constant dot true. So field user equals true. Our next outcome is going to be agent user. And again, we're going to do the same thing. So it's $record, user, field user, except this is going to be false. And that's all we have to do. So now we have this decision element, and we have this email alert, and we want to put that under field user. So we can click cut and paste. And I believe this is a new thing as well. Again, I find that pretty exciting. So let's talk about the email alert first. So you have a couple of ways to create email alerts. This is one that we already created as part of the workflow, and we're using that. You can also create a quick action. You can see here record ID. So we have merged fields on the email template. And so what this is telling the flow is to use the data from the current record. And the ID is the case ID. So now we need to create a task for agent user. So we're going to search for task. And you don't want this first element, that's for the feed item. You want the quick action. So review new email received task. And we want to assign this to the case owner. So we're going to go down $record, and then it should just be owner ID because it's the case owner ID. Now for due date, this is going to depend on your requirements. For us, we didn't want, the business did not want the due date to be today. They wanted it to be tomorrow. So we're going to create a new resource here because I always forget to create it ahead of time. So the new resource is we're going to create a formula, and we're just going to call it due date. And the data type is going to be date. And the resource is going to be $record, last email, if I can find it, last email date, +1. So it's going to be tomorrow. Syntax is valid. So let me get out of here and let me just show you the other way of creating a resource, creating a variable or a constant or anything is you can go up here to toggle toolbox and you can click new resource here. And if you do a better job of planning than I do, you can create all of these ahead of time. So next, we're going to skip these two. Let's look at related to ID because we want the task to be associated to the case. So here, we're going to go to our favorite $record and just ID because it's going to be the case ID. So now status, so I would recommend actually copying this from your pick list value so that you make sure to use the correct value. And then for subject, we're going to type in review new email received. Now I know there's a lot of thoughts about hard coding and flows. That's just what we did. I think that what we could have done is create a variable or constant and then put that in here so that if we want to go back and change something, we're not changing, going into the actual task. Instead, we'd be changing a variable or a constant. So that's on my list of things to look at and potentially change. So now we're going to click Save As because our flow is done. And here, I like to make sure that I know which workflows it came from. And then if the workflow has a good description, I'll just keep that. So we're going to save. Now, we have to activate our flow. It's very important to remember to activate your flow. You'd be surprised how many times that may get you. The thing is, we haven't deactivated our workflows. But if we go to activate here, we're going to get an error so that we can't have the workflow and the flow active at the same time. So we're going to go back to our workflows and deactivate them both. And then activate the flow. So how do we test this? A couple of different ways. Debug. So the thing about debug in this case, we would skip the start condition requirements. And the reason we're going to do that is because emails coming into the case, that's what triggers it. And you can't really do that in debug. So which one should we trigger first? So I'm marked as a field user first. So we're going to do, let's just test case 37. Since I'm marked as a field user, that means I should get an email, which is correct. You can see start condition requirements, they are skipped. You can see it goes through the decision and the outcome executed as field user. And then you can see it's sending the case ID over, and the output, it's sending the email. So now we're going to go back and we're going to change this. And we're going to debug again. And this time it should create a task. And you can see it went through the correct scenario. It went to agent user and it created the task. And because we're doing this in debug, it rolled back, so it didn't actually create any records. Now, I would recommend actually testing this as well, rather than just using debug. I think debug is a great tool. I've seen sometimes it's something I need to work on and to learn a little bit. So, I've seen sometimes where debug works, but sometimes it seems like maybe it doesn't actually work when you test it. So I think debug is a great way to make sure it works as the first step, but you do actually need to test it as well. And that's it, Jen.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your migration strategy, your gotchas, your nuggets of wisdom, and hats off to you for doing a demo live. Like, that's awesome, and it worked flawlessly. That's great. All right, so now let's bring back Diana. Now, Diana, I know that the migration of workflow rules and processes are pretty top of mind for our admins, especially those who have yet to start their journey. Can you share with the audience the roadmap for the migration?
I definitely can. Also, shout out to Rebecca for that awesome demo. That was amazing.
Thank you.
That was awesome. So yeah, here's a couple updates about where we're at on our roadmap to retirement. We know this is a long journey. It's why we're sharing it early. It's why we have folks like Rebecca available to share their experiences, to give us feedback, to share with all of you, so everyone can have plenty of time to take on this work. So in the winter release, we disabled the ability to create new workflow rules after we have the migration tool out already, with plans to basically do the same for Process Builder. So we're sort of running parallel paths towards workflow rule retirement and Process Builder retirement, one after the other, mostly just for time considerations to try to get material out to you guys sooner. So Process Builder is coming up next after this. So you'll see kind of a clone of what we did for workflow rules with Process Builder. So we are releasing in spring 23 the Migrate to Flow tool support for Process Builder as well. You can see an awesome demo of that either this Friday at the admin RL or a more extended deep dive into it at the Flow Release Readiness Live happening the week after on Wednesday in about a week. So can dive into that a lot more. And then going forward, we plan to do the same thing where we'll disable the ability to create new process builders going forward, as well as continuing to add to the retirement tool. And really our strategy here is to say, okay, we know migration can take a while, but what we want you to do first is to really stop investing more automation and more of your time and effort into the existing tools that we know are going away, which is why we're trying to disable that create new quite early, but probably leave some time until we actually fully end support in the next few years for those tools more generally. So it's a great time to get started. As Rebecca said, start small, build 1 or 2 flows, and then start to think about a migration strategy for your overall set of existing automation. And then lastly, our sort of third track that we're doing through all of this is we are continuing to invest in flow. So based on your feedback, based on what happens during migration, as well as general flow feedback, we are investing in making triggered flows better in order to surpass process builder and workflow rules for a lot of things, or at least meet them with the feature set. I think we've met most of the major feature gaps between them. So now we're looking at how can we make flow better, or how can we kind of get things around the edges or dive deeper. So as mentioned, the big thing we did in the spring 23 release is remove that 2,000 element limit per transaction, which caused a lot of challenges in loops. That doesn't mean you can start putting your pink items, your DML, inside the loops. We still have a lot of other limits in there to try to prevent resource hogging. But what we didn't want to do is constrict flow design, which is sort of what that did. It wasn't really an effective limit, I think, from a actual limiting your consumption standpoint. It was more of a limit on how you designed your automation. And going forward, we're planning to add custom metadata types. And then we have goals in the future to improve record type handling to make more usability improvements for some of these actions, as well as for the overall canvas. And really just keep getting your feedback, keep incorporating that either into flow or into the migration tools, depending on what's most useful, until we end support in the next 2 years, most likely. So yeah, that's what I have on the roadmap. Again, if you want to see a lot more cool stuff we're doing in Flow unrelated to this, I can highly recommend the Flow Release Readiness Live next week, where there's a ton of like betas and new goodies coming for screen flows, integrations, lots of other cool stuff.
Well, thanks, Diana, for sharing your roadmap for us with us. I am particularly excited for custom metadata support finally in Flow. So there are several questions in queue, so we're going to transition to the Q&A section of our episode. As a reminder, please start your questions with a Q:, so it's easy for me to identify amongst the chat amongst the audience. All right, so this isn't a question, but I did want to call out the shout out that Andy gave to you, Rebecca, on your demoing skills.
Thank you, Andy. Much appreciated.
Rebecca can come back and do it for me next time. We release Readiness Live.
Okay, so let's get this question in here. Okay, so the question is from Heather. How do you deal with when the debug shows something created, assigned, but when activated, it is not actually creating the field?
Oh, that's a really good question. And that's something I've struggled with. At that point, honestly, I started ignoring the debug because I haven't worked with it a whole lot. And I just start working through step by step, trying to figure out what's causing it in the flow. I will say that's where make sure you have the right version activated, because that's been a big one to me. And then also it may be before save, after save. Those are some other things that tripped me up. So not the best answer, but it's kind of sort of what I've struggled through, and I definitely understand where you're coming from with that.
I'll add in a little bit there. So flow debug, when you hit debug inside your flow, is going to debug that specific flow. So it'll show what happens, and it sort of mocks, especially in record triggered, it mocks out the change. So you can debug things like is changed. But what it doesn't do is should do the entire save order. So it doesn't do if you have apex triggers firing or validation rules or other things. And so often when you see a mismatch, one of the things might be to go look and see what other automation or things in the save order might have run during that same time period, and looking at it that way. I have dreams of one day all of this being debuggable in one place, but that is, that is a little bit in my dream bucket, not in the realistic in the future. But that's another thing we hear a lot from customers. So that can be a good place to start, is just try to figure out if maybe that flow didn't run at all because the conditions were changed by an automation that ran before you got to that flow.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question is from Salesforce Break, Andy. Can we get scheduled an async path on update every time the condition holds true?
So we're sort of, so we're working on it. I would say, I think there is a valid case, especially for async. Generally with schedules, we do want you to have some kind of entry condition, because we don't want schedules to just kind of pile up on the queue when a bunch of transactions get made. So folks can, we don't want it to sort of happen every time a record change happens, because those do have larger limits and you can potentially be doing more costly things. So we do want you to think about your entry conditions and make sure they are constrained enough that you're using your resources wisely. But we have particularly talked about with scheduled, figuring out ways to open that up, particularly when you're doing a scheduled trigger based on a date. I think one of the challenges we have with our current scheduled path design is we don't distinguish when the schedule is based on the trigger event and when it's based on a specific date, because that specific date is going to happen a lot less often than anytime the trigger is created and updated. So what we've already changed the restrictions a little bit on that. So some more things will work. But I think there's probably a little further that we could push it in the future. We just still have to figure out the right balance there, so we're not overwhelming the amount of automation that's going on. So it's a good point of feedback, and it's something kind of, I would say, on the midterm future looking thing.
There was a question earlier about the Slack channel that Rebecca mentioned earlier on in the interview process. And to get access to that, go to salesforcebreak.com, and then you can navigate to that Slack channel there. That's not a Salesforce property, that's salesforcebreak.com. Okay, so next question is from Andrew. Ability to debug record triggered flows on some objects like email message doesn't work. Is support for these objects coming soon?
Sadly, it is not. This is definitely a bugaboo that we have, and it has to do actually with the way those objects are configured themselves, and that they don't have certain layout things configured, which makes them unselectable in the way we've designed the debug experience. So each object owner we have to track down at the company and figure out if they can change that feature on the object and support it, which has proven to be quite difficult given some of those objects are quite old. So unfortunately for those, often you will have to just activate and test in your sandbox environment rather than use debug. We'd like to do it, but that turns out to be a harder problem and not sort of a single bug like we thought it would be at this point in time. So I think we have a known issue out for it. And yeah, it's a bummer of the nuances of the platform sometimes.
All right, next question is from Jay. I run into character limits in the entry condition formula. It also includes spaces. I like to format for readability. The limit is 1,500 characters, I believe. Any plans to increase this?
I didn't know about this, so I don't actually know the answer. I will ask our engineers or look into it to find out. That's not one that I've heard before, so it's totally possible. You can maybe ping me on the Trailblazer community afterwards or on Twitter, and I will try to find out, but I don't actually know. Or come back to RRL and ask that question. Maybe I'll have an answer by then.
All right, another question from Andrew. How can we use Flow to throw errors nicely so we don't have to write a trigger for complex data validation?
So I'm guessing this is secretly an ask by Andrew for custom error messages and record triggered flows, which we don't support today. I would say if you want us to support that fully, voting that up on the idea exchange is a great way to do it. We have some other ideas that are higher ranked on the idea exchange that are starting to get some love. So that's a great place. I think there are in some parts of flows, you can use our error message. Actually, can't remember if it was Labs Day, one of our other kind of webinars, I think it was Alex Radanakov, who like presented a whole presentation on how she has like a really nice way of doing error handling and flow that she sort of uses subflows and the flow error message, at least to do some versions of error handling. It was a very creative solution. I kind of doubt if it's just for record triggered flows that's going to be what you need, but there are some really interesting community solutions out there around some error handling that I've seen. So yeah, but if you want it out of the box for flow, it is something we'd like to do on our roadmap. We just need the votes. So.
Okay, question from Salesforce Break. Formula entry conditions have been great. I use this to check record type. I do get interesting behavior sometimes. Are both record type name and record type developer name supported?
They should be. What I'm not sure of is if they both work when transferring between environments. So usually what happens with record types and why it's on my list to do, but also why it has proven very challenging for even us to do on the engineering side is sometimes things change when being moved like sandbox to production or between environments because it's the IDs underneath versus the names. It should be both. I think both name and developer name should be supported. I don't know if one is more robust than the other. So that's another one I could probably ask my team and see if folks have any insight. But I don't have anything off the top of my head.
All right, next question from Bruce. Will I be able to carbon copy or blind copy recipients on emails I generate from Flow Actions?
I think that depends on what version of emails you're doing. So we support email alerts, which are the same thing used in workflow rules, which I believe support CC and BC. I don't know offhand if the send simple email action, maybe folks in the comments know this better than me, supports CC or BC. There's also like a community one out there, Send Better Email, that has a couple extra goodies on it. So yeah, I think it would depend a little bit, but I believe email alerts at least should support it.
I believe you're right. I think email alerts do support at least CC.
Yeah, I'm not sure about BCC. So.
All right, Jay's back with another question. I get check spelling errors every time I try to reference $record.owner group in entry condition formula. I can reference user group in a non-formula entry conditions. Is this a bug?
It might be. I know we have some bugs in specifically when it comes to groups and formulas. That's kind of a recipe for bugginess, because there's a lot of special casing that goes into groups, and then formulas can be a little finicky as well. So that's not one I'm familiar with, but I do know we've had some other bugs in this general vicinity. So yeah, that's another one I can ask the team about.
Right. Again, as a reminder, if you do have a question, post it with a Q colon. Oh, we have another question from Andrew. Will there be the ability to better handle exceptions, like if a flow action causes a DML, having the ability to better handle the exception would be on fire?
Actually, that's what I think, Alex. I mix up error messages and error handling. I think that's what Alex's presentation is about now that I am reading this. So I think, yeah, both of these are sort of part and parcel of some of the same areas that we'd like to get to, but I think right now aren't necessarily the highest priority relative to some of the other things that are migration blockers as opposed to things to improve flow with. But yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, we do already today have the ability to handle errors. So you can add on an error to a DML and add a fault path is what it's called. So we have that today. If there's specific improvements to that you'd like to see, definitely share those in idea exchange.
Right, this might be our last question unless someone submits after us. From Cassandra. Sometimes when I try to copy and paste field resource names and flow into the variable line, it errors out. Guess this is also a bug. Is there someone I can reach out to or go through help?
Probably a good place to start would be support for something like that. If there is a bug there. Yeah. Also, the Trailblazer community can be a great place if it's sort of looking for a crowdsourced solution or have other people seen this. So those are two great places to go if you see something you think is a bug, because you can sometimes get crowdsourced feedback like, I've seen that too. And then you have some backing to go, or you might be like, oh, I have a quick trick to solve it. So that can be a great place to get started. I don't know offhand specifically. Or sometimes syntax, you just need to clear the field, and sometimes there's an extra space or something. So if deleting it and adding it back in or something, deleting a character and adding it back clears it, then that kind of thing can happen. Group is an invalid object.
Oh, this was just elaboration on Jay's previous question.
Again, I do recall hearing about something related to, I think it was queues and formulas and validation, where like check syntax that it was invalid, but it actually was valid. So this may be similar to that bug that I think we do have. So that's another thing to check on some of those formulas. If you also get the validation at save time, there are occasionally slight mismatches between how we validate in the box and at save. Wish there weren't, but it sort of has to do with how formulas are constructed. So that's another thing to look for when you're looking at formula validation.
So there's conversation in the chat that you aren't seeing, Diana, about the Cassandra's piece about the copy and paste, and both Andrew and Andy are noting that this wasn't the case before, and that they've just decided to live with it the way it is.
I've actually
See, that's
noticed
why I
that
think
as
the
well.
community is useful, because sometimes there's things that don't bubble up, but they are widespread, and it's hard. It can be hard for us to tease out if it's just sort of one person seeing an odd behavior, or it's a behavior that everyone sees and lives with. So, all right, we can.
And I'm sorry, Rebecca, what were you?
I've actually noticed it as well. That's why in the demo I didn't copy and paste because I always seem to get a little error. And like Andy said, I just, it is what it is. So,
All right, yeah, I don't know about this one, but it's sounding like this is everyone else does. So, yeah, maybe Rebecca, after the call, we can you can actually walk me through the specific steps. I can maybe pinpoint it a little more.
yep, happy to.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's it for the question. So thank you, everyone, for your interaction with us. All right. So to recap what we've learned in today's episode, the order of execution plays a much bigger role with flows now because we're dealing with before save and after save flows. And as you build out your flow, again, it doesn't need to be perfect. Just get started and do the best that you can and go back and make tweaks as you learn more about flow. And lastly, awesome admins, you can do this, right? Get it done. So what we showed you today is just one migration strategy. It's definitely really about how comfortable you are with the various approach that you want to take. So for example, when I migrated workflow rules to Flow in 2019, I tackled this object by object. But from all the approaches that I've seen, they have one thing in common. It's do your analysis. I mean, my org was over 5 years old, and there were workflow rules that the business people now didn't even know existed, and they may be new business people from those who initially had the business requirements that resulted in that workflow rule. So I was able to Marie Kondo them and also improve the overall design of my automation. So to hear from another perspective, watch a previous Automate This broadcast about migrating workflow roles and processes to Flow with Alexandra Radovanovic. And you can go to that short URL that you see on the screen. If you're going to Trailblazer DX, which is March 7th through the 8th in San Francisco, you can watch us both live doing that same presentation, follow the link to register, or find more about TDX. And next month, we have a great episode in store for you. We will showcase two Trailblazers, Jennifer Cole and Myra Wilson, who have solved their requirements with MuleSoft Composer and Flow to integrate and automate business processes. We'll have the VP Product Manager, Jean-Baptiste Minchilli, to share his roadmap, talk about what's coming up at TDX for MuleSoft Composer, and we'll answer your product questions. So set the reminder now on the live stream page and be reminded of it later. So now is your turn. Start making a list of workflow roles that need to be migrated. Then do the analysis to see what workflows are still needed and what can be combined. Convert simple workflows first, gain that confidence in the process, and then cross them off the list. And take training. There's a lot of training that's out there. I know Rebecca highly recommends Salesforce Break, which was extremely helpful to her. So it's release time. Join us for Admin Preview Live this Friday, January 20th at 11:15 a.m. Pacific, 2:15 p.m. Eastern. You'll see Diana demo the latest in the Migrate to Flow tool and cover other Flow enhancements. We'll also cover user access, Lightning Platform, Salesforce Mobile, and admin user highlights. For even more Flow greatness, join us next Wednesday, January 25th at 9 a.m. Pacific or noon Eastern for the Salesforce Flow Release Readiness Live. Access the short URL that you see on the screen to add these and other Spring 23 Release Readiness Live sessions to your calendar. And I want to give a huge thank you to Rebecca for being a guest on Automate This, and Diana, always a pleasure to have you back on. And thank you to all of you for joining us for this episode of Automate This. I look forward to seeing you at future sessions. And talk to me. Tell me about what you thought about this episode. Complete this short survey at the URL that you see and tell me what you liked and what you want to see in future episodes. And as a reminder, the best way to be notified when we live stream is to set the reminder on the live stream episode page. You'll get a reminder the day of the event. We'll also post upcoming sessions in all of our various social channels, so follow us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins, No I, LinkedIn, and the Trailblazer community.